in Afghanistan today struggling to keep their jobs and to continue also doing their work. So I'm very cognizant of the importance that you play as journalists, as media, in connecting people, in connecting countries, and also in connecting us in the United Nations to the public. As you know, I have spent the last 2 days here in Afghanistan on a visit that comes at an extremely critical moment. In a couple of days, the international community will meet again to look at its commitments towards Afghanistan and its people, the solidarity but also the financial support that it can offer, first of all in terms of addressing the extraordinarily desperate humanitarian situation of so many people in Afghanistan today, but at the same time also to understand that the answer to these challenges is also to invest in the recovery of Afghanistan's economy. That means recognizing that the people of this country need urgent support to also be able to earn their own livelihoods, to have income to be able to buy food, to send children to school, to pay medical bills. So many people in the country today are struggling to survive. It is a situation that not only in the follow through the events of last year, the political turmoil, but also COVID-19 and a drought has created an economy and an economic reality in Afghanistan today that is essentially turning more and more people into poor people. In fact, UNDP already warned at the end of last year that if we could not stabilize this economic freefall, maybe 90% of Afghanistan's people would live below the poverty line sometime later this year. I think to all of you who work in the media, who travel across the country, you have seen what this means. To the men and women, to the girls and boys of this country, we urgently need to work in order to reverse these trends. I yesterday arrived and immediately traveled to Mazar-e-Sharif because we in the United Nations are very conscious of the fact that not only is Afghanistan a large country with 40 million people, but that poverty is not only concentrated in the cities, it is across the whole country, it is in the rural areas, and it is also in these contexts that we need to find the solutions for addressing this. I had the privilege yesterday of meeting about 30 to 40 women-led enterprises. Our collaboration with them through the Women's Chamber of Commerce allows us to understand, first of all, the particular challenges and plight that women and, for example, widows face in sustaining their families. How their enterprises, small as they may be, create income, create jobs, in the way that we are able to support them in this desperate situation can make an enormous difference. But I've also this morning met here, just now, leaders from the private sector. Afghanistan is, by history and by virtue of its economy, an economy in which farmers, small enterprises, but also businesses are a foundation of how this economy functions. We need to understand this as international partners so that we can also focus our support to trying to assist the private sector. Whether it is a widow who is running a small-scale enterprise that maybe provides livelihoods for another 50 women, producing food, apparel, or indeed other products for the market, or whether it is investing, for example, in access to electricity. Afghanistan is an economy that desperately needs reliable power. So far it is dependent on importing power, yet renewable energy provides an extraordinary opportunity, both for the rural areas and also for the national economy. And it was to me one of those images that I took from yesterday's journey to Mazar-e-Sharif. When I flew into the city, I noticed that the plots for farmers that were green, all of them had solar panels next to them. It's the simple access to electricity that can transform a farming operation, an industry, and indeed a town and a national economy. Now let me also say a few words about what the international community, and particularly we, the United Nations, and I representing the United Nations Development Programme, believe is of critical importance in the next few days, weeks and months. First of all, we must maintain the international community's interest, attention, commitment and conviction to provide the humanitarian support that is so critical to save lives in Afghanistan today. A few days ago, we hosted a pledging conference for the people of Yemen. And already then, we noticed with deep disappointment that only 1/3 of the humanitarian appeal was funded. We live in a world that has many crises right now, and some would say competing crises. I would argue we need to keep the world's attention on the fact that there are multiple crises, and none of them either deserve that the world turns its back on them, nor can it afford to turn its back on them. The pledging conference for Afghanistan is both an appeal to the international community to assist in this desperate situation of an economic implosion that is almost without precedent in terms of the shortage of time and the massive consequences for Afghanistan's economy. Millions of people depend on that support and that solidarity, and it is our commitment to the people of Afghanistan to take that message to the world. In fact, my colleague Martin Griffiths, our emergency relief coordinator, is also in Afghanistan today, and it is another illustration of how deep our commitment to the people of Afghanistan runs in the United Nations. But let me also say that we need to understand that the future of Afghanistan depends on investing in its people, on enabling people to earn their livelihoods with dignity, on addressing the constraints that people are facing right now. That ranges from the collapse of markets, interrupted supply chains, not enough electricity, but also to the larger context of an economy that has faced many disruptions. A functioning central bank, a private and commercial banking sector that allows money to flow within an economy. The ability that we have also focused on as UNDP with our Arbor Day program, which is to try and provide economic support directly to people across the country in terms of their ability to run small and medium enterprises, cash for work programs that can rehabilitate infrastructure, essentially creating the conditions within which people are able to earn their living and then invest in the future development of the economy. The Arbor Day program now works in 10 provinces. We depend on the international community to continue to finance this work, and it will allow us, together with many of the sister agencies of the UN and the NGOs with whom we partner, to expand this program to reach millions of people within months. This is part of the recovery, of the reconstruction, and also of the vision that the country is pursuing in trying to enable its people to earn a decent livelihood while developing national infrastructure and also its education sector, its health sectors. But let me also say that in my discussions with the leadership in the country, I have shared some of the insights that we have developed as the United Nations family, as UNDP, on where the priorities for intervention could lie, on the kinds of programs that we are able to implement right now, while, as we all know, the political context remains complex. But it is no excuse not to do something, and I think we have all together tried to prove that a great deal can be done. But the signals that the leadership gives, first of all, to the people within the country, but also to the international community, matter enormously. The decision to suspend the return of girls to secondary education last week has not only caused great disappointment, tears and sadness, particularly amongst those most directly affected, the girls of Afghanistan, the girls who were looking forward to continuing their education. I have listened carefully over the last 2 days, and I've heard time and again that in Afghanistan today there is no question that education for all is a principle that will guide this country into the future. The question is, how will that happen? And the question also is, if there are technical reasons why girls' education in the secondary school sector could not resume last week, then we are committed to assisting you. If there are technical constraints, be it the training of teachers, the construction of schools, or whatever else it may be that has prevented the reopening of schools and the resumption of secondary girls' education last week, further delays will not only harm the girls of Afghanistan's chances for the future, it will in fact affect the way that the international community sees itself engaging and committing to working with the people of Afghanistan. For us in the United Nations, this is a critical moment in which the world needs to understand Afghanistan. But the leadership of Afghanistan must also recognize that the world can very easily turn to other crises, set other priorities, essentially consider its engagement with Afghanistan one that it does not feel able to pursue any further. This cannot be allowed to happen. This would be a tragedy not only for the country, but in fact for generations to come. The reason why we are here and why UNDP and so many other of our sister agencies in the United Nations family, but also NGOs, have stayed alongside these difficult months is because we believe in the future of Afghanistan. And we cannot, in our own consciousness, turn our backs on the citizens of this country. But one of our responsibilities and one of the roles that also we, as leaders in the United Nations systems, must play is to allow the world to understand what is happening in Afghanistan, and also to share with the leadership here what are some of the parameters for that support and that solidarity to continue in the months to come. Now, this issue of girls in secondary education is one of many issues defining the reality of Afghans today. But sometimes single issues become defining issues in relationships. And I know that there are today in Afghanistan, perhaps unbeknownst to many outside, in quite a number of provinces, girls attending secondary school education. This is also a part of the reality of Afghanistan today. So I urge everyone to realize that we must communicate clearly with one another, and we must ensure that there is confidence and trust in the ability to serve the people of Afghanistan, whether it is in saving lives in this humanitarian crisis, or whether it is to invest in the livelihoods, to reactivate the private sector, to address the constraints that prevent millions of small and medium-scale enterprises, and by the way, many of them women-led, to be able to recover from this extraordinary economic shock. That is why we as the United Nations Development Programme are here today in Afghanistan, why we are committed to the people of this nation, and yet we are cognizant of many of the challenges that lie ahead of us. My visit, alongside that of other leaders of the UN, are meant to signal that we will not turn away from Afghanistan, but our ability to continue to be engaged will in part depend also on the decisions and directions that the leadership of this country will take in the coming days, weeks and months. Thank you very much.
پژواک خبری اژانس د پیښو ریښتینې هنداره